Okay, so let's get started. We had just started Gideon. I have to tell you, I don't know how you feel about Gideon. Gideon, in my opinion, is the star of the book of Judges. I mean, nobody comes near him, in my opinion, his righteousness, but not just his righteousness, because, for example, Deborah's very righteous, no question. And then we meet people that we assume are righteous that we just don't know that much about. Ehud, Ben Gera, Othniel, and these people are very righteous. So there's others that are righteous, and there's those that are semi-righteous, and there's all those that are problematic. But when you talk about Gideon, the breadth of his leadership together with his righteousness is very, very special. Okay, so we're taking our time. There's quite a number of chapters that deal with Gideon. So we're moving through it because I think it is really very important to appreciate all these various aspects of him. Okay, so where we left off last time, we're chapter 6, and we're going to start with verse 25. So what we had until now was, first of all, we had a description of the terrible times that Gideon is living in, and we have an angel of God who comes to him and tells him that he is going to go save Israel. And what we see right away with Gideon is he is always doubting. He's questioning. He's asking, how do I know this? How is this going to happen? Give me a sign. And what we saw last week will become really a pattern with Gideon. So, for example, what we saw last time in verse 15, he said to him, Gideon says to the angel, please, my Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Okay, so he's questioning that. And then he says in verse 17, if I have gained your favor, give me a sign that it is you who are speaking to me. Okay, so he's doubting two things. Number one, is this really an angel of God? And number two, how is he supposed to accomplish all the stuff that the angel's telling him to do? And then, of course, he has the initial sign, and there's this, he brings offerings, and then you have this big fire, and of course then it becomes clear. Verse 22, then Gideon realized that it was an angel of the Lord, and Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for I've seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And then he builds an altar. Okay, so that's bringing us into what we're doing now. Okay, so now on that very same night, we'll start with verse 25. That night the Lord said to him, take the young bull belonging to your father and another bull 7 years old, pull down the altar of Baal which belongs to your father, and cut down the sacred post which is beside it. Now, just want to make very clear here, if we go back to the initial things that in the conversation between the angel and God, so we have, the angel and Gideon, what we have is first of all, we know that there's tremendous oppression, okay, on the people. And so one of the things that he's going to do is he's going to be sent, Gideon, to rescue them from the hands of the oppressors, who in this case are the Midianites. But we also know that there's a terrible problem going on with worshiping idols, okay? Now, what seems to be the most stressful issue here, from the beginning of chapter 6, when we have the description of everything, there's tremendous description about the stress that the nation is under because of the persecution of Midian. So, and we have, again, God saying in verse 14, go in the strength of yours and deliver Israel from the Midianites. Okay, and then that becomes the whole conversation. How do I know it's you? How do I know? How am I supposed to do this? So you would anticipate then that the very first thing that God would tell him to do was gather an army and go save Israel from the Midianites. Instead, the very first thing that God is telling him to do is to destroy the altar of the Baal. And I think this is very, very significant because it tells us something that we see as a thread throughout the Bible and certainly in the book of Judges, that there's an intimate connection between the pagan worship of the nation of Israel and the various trouble they are under. Every time things are good, after it's good for too long, it seems like the nation of Israel kind of gets spoiled, forgets that it is God who has delivered them, forgets that it is God who has given them a good life and a peace, etc. And so they then turn to worship pagan gods. As a result, God sends an oppressor. And then when the oppression gets so terrible and the nation turns to God, at that point, God will send a savior to them. Okay, and so we do know from verse 6 that indeed that happened. Okay, it says Israel was reduced to utter misery by the Midianites, and the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Okay, and as a result, we have this prophet coming to them and saying, look what happened. You left. I am Lord God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites whose land you dwell, but you did not obey me. Okay, so we have here in verse 10 already a statement that despite the fact that God sends a prophet and he's willing to help them, he says right away, but you went to pagan gods, and that doesn't seem to have any effect on the nation. So we need something else, and that's really in Gideon's case, he is really being sent to do two things. In order for Gideon to succeed in saving the nation, they need to be worthy of being saved, in which case it's not enough that they cry out to God. They have to get rid of the pagan worship. And so the first thing that he does then is he goes and he is going to get rid of the Baal. Okay, so let's see how he does it. Verse 26, then build an altar to the Lord your God on the level ground up top of this stronghold. Take the other bull and offer it as a burnt offering using the wood of the sacred post that you have cut down. In other words, on the place, this is a very symbolic thing. Get rid of that altar to the Baal and replace it, okay, with an altar to God. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But as he was afraid to do it by day on account of his father's household and the townspeople, he did it by night. See the fear of Gideon. We are going to see the fear of Gideon throughout, but it's very interesting. Even though you would think that Gideon should have enough confidence. He's just been sent by the angel. He has been spoken to by God. He is told, don't worry, you're going to succeed because I'm going to be with you. And yet there's still this fear. And it's very interesting because throughout this time, the fear seems to be accepted by God as normal, which is very, very interesting. Because what this is telling us is that Gideon is a righteous man, but he is not supernatural in any way. He has very human fears. Okay, and his fears are not seen as mitigating his belief in God. They are human fears that are there, and God is going to accommodate them, which is very interesting because you don't always see that. Very often, fear is seen as lack of faith. Here, it's not. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Early the next morning, the townspeople found that the altar of Baal had been torn down and the sacred post beside it had been cut down, and that the second bill had been offered on the newly built altar. They said to one another, who did this thing? Upon inquiry and investigation, they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did this thing. The townspeople said to Joash, bring out your son, for he must die. He has torn down the altar of Baal and cut down the sacred post beside it. Okay, so what we are seeing here now, it's not just that the nation here is worshiping the Baal. You notice they cried out to God a few verses earlier, and they're worshiping the Baal. This reminds us very much of a situation that we'll learn way, way later, not in Judges, but way, way into the book of Kings, few books hence, okay, with Elijah. When Elijah does that amazing pyrotechnic display on Mount Carmel, do you remember one of the things he says? He says, you can't keep jumping from one end to the other. What is he saying to them? You can't say you believe in God and you believe in the Baal at the same time. Doesn't work. You have to make a choice. You either believe in God or you believe in the Baal. Okay, so you have a sense that this is what's going on here. They cried out to God, and yet at the same time, they're very, very worried that he destroyed the Baal. And I don't think they're there to kill him just because they don't agree on something. I'm assuming that they are afraid to give up any belief in Baal, and they're probably worried that Baal will come and punish them in some way for this destruction. And that's why they're so eager to have Gideon killed, because they want to make sure that Baal won't be angry with them. Okay. But Joash is a very wise man. Listen to what he says. But Joash said to all who had risen against him, do you have to contend for Baal? Do you have to vindicate him? Whoever fights his battle shall be dead by morning. If he is a god, let him fight his own battles, since it is his altar that has been torn down. What a brilliant, brilliant comment. Now, when I read this comment, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but I've mentioned many times this idea of the Midrashic Traditions. We have a whole body of literature in Judaism called the Midrash, which are just volumes and volumes of stories. Many of these stories appear in the Talmud. Many of them appear in various anthologies of Midrash that go back to, I don't know, 3rd or 4th century is probably the earliest ones, and going up to, I don't know, Middle Ages or something, different books. And what they do is they're all quoting ancient people. They're quoting people sometimes even as far back as during Second Temple periods and shortly after. So these are oral traditions, stories that have been passed down, one generation to generation, but we have them now in these various volumes. Well, there's a very famous story about Abraham. Now, this story about Abraham is basically explains how it is that Abraham left, under what circumstances Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees. And I don't want to belabor the point now. You can look it up if you want, but in Genesis 11, there's already a departure of Terah and Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees, and they get as far as Haran. And then at the beginning of Genesis 12, we have God calling to Abraham and saying, leave, and go to the land of Israel. So there's already a departure of Abraham and his family from Ur of the Chaldees earlier. And so what this Midrash comes to tell us is what were the circumstances that led to this. And basically the circumstances are as follows. Also, it's a Midrash that tells us a lot about Abraham himself and what his character is. And it talks about the fact that Abraham's father, Terah, had an idol store. He sold idols. And when Abraham was a young boy, his father left him in charge of the idol store. And Abraham already at this age felt that idols were wrong, and he already recognized there was only one God, creator of the universe. And so while his father was out, he goes and he smashes all the idols. He takes a stick, like a club or something, and he smashes all the idols, and he takes the club and sticks it in his hand of this big idol that's sitting there on his throne. I don't know, picture a big Buddha or something, he sticks the stick in his hand. And when his father comes back and his father says, oh my gosh, how are these idols? How did I get smashed? Abraham said he did it, the big idol. So what does his father say? He says, oh, come on. You know that idols don't have the capability of smashing other idols. At which point Abraham says, well, if they don't have the capability, why are you worshiping them? Why are you worshiping them? Okay. And I feel when I read this conversation of Joash with the neighbors, that this is the source for that Midrash. Okay. The same idea that is expressed here from Joash is borrowed by the Midrash to flesh out this story about Abraham, because it is a very, very, very good, it's a very good argument, and it requires someone to have stepped back enough from pagan worship to realize how stupid it is, okay? That even the people themselves don't really trust their gods, even as they're worshiping them, okay? So this is actually very interesting. Of course, that was the end of that. That day they named him Yerubbaal, meaning let Baal contend with him, since he tore down his altar. So clearly it says, there became a consensus. Joash's statement was not just leave him alone, let Baal take care of it. But Joash's statement was like Abraham's statement to Terah. They realized through this statement, why are they worshiping Baal? Isn't this stupid? And therefore credited Gideon for taking on Baal and defeating him. Because in this whole interchange, and we have to say with the help of his father, okay, that Gideon was able to kind of just get rid of the power that this idea of Baal held over the people at that time. Okay, so once that happens, now they're ready to take on the enemy. All Midian, Amalek, and the Kedemites join forces. Now, every one of these people are, I think we discussed this last week, they are all by nature Bedouin types, nomadic tribes. They don't have countries. They live on plunder, and this is not good societies. And so basically Midian and these people that are coming, they're oppressing the nation in order to squeeze out them everything possible. They have no interest in running or building a society. You know, there have been over history, there were empires that controlled Israel that made things very difficult for the Jews, but at the very least, they were trying to, at the same time, impose order and some kind of structure and governance. That is not the case here. This is just a bunch of wild tribes, and all they want to do is squeeze and benefit and run away without creating anything. All they're doing is destroying. Okay? They crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. The Spirit of the Lord enveloped Gideon. He sounded the horn, and the Abiezerites, this is his own clan, part of Manasseh, rallied behind him. And he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they too rallied behind him. He then sent messengers through Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet the Manassites. So these are all people to the north. Manasseh is today northern Samaria, and going into the Galilee, which is the Jezreel Valley, that is part of Manasseh, and then it continues further north to these other tribes, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Okay? And Gideon said to God, now here we go again. All right, he's ready. He's called the battle. He has his army. And what does he say? If you really intend to deliver Israel through me, as you have said, here I place a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If dew falls only on the fleece and all the ground remains dry, I shall know that you will deliver Israel through me, as you have said. So he's still doing deals with God. God already showed him, the angel showed him the fire on the altar. Okay, he successfully destroyed the altar of Baal, and everything ended up fine, and yet he still feels a need for this sign. Okay, and that is what happened. Early the next day, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew from the fleece, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me if I speak just once more. Let me make just one more test with the fleece, that the fleece alone be dry while there is dew all over the ground. God did so that night. Only the fleece was dry while there was dew all over the ground. So again, we have these signs that Gideon is asked for, and God is cooperating. We do not even have a hint that God is growing impatient with Gideon or that he's angry with him. It's very, very interesting. Okay. Early next day, now in chapter 7, early next day, Yerubbaal, that is Gideon. He has two names now. Of course, Yerubbaal represents his fight. You know, he defeated the Baal. And all the troops with him encamped above En Harod, while the camp of Midian was in the plain to the north of him at Givat Moreh. Okay, now all of this is near, it's in the Galilee. It's not found from Mount Tabor. It's near the Gilboa. It's a picture, let's say, southwest of the Sea of Galilee. That's about where we are. The Lord said to Galilee, now we have a whole different kind of situation where it is God now who is going to be using a different sort of sign in order to whittle down the troops. Okay, we're going to see something very interesting here. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many troops with you for me to deliver Midian into their hands. Israel might claim for themselves the glory due to me, thinking our own hand has brought us victory. Therefore, announce to the men, let anybody who is timid and fearful turn back as a bird flies from Mount Gilead. Thereupon, 22,000 of the troops turned back and 10,000 remained. Okay, first of all, let's look at exactly what God is saying. What's the purpose of this? We're going to start with 32,000 people, and we're going to end up with 300. Okay? Why? Because God wants it to be very clear that the victory belongs to God. Because in natural circumstances, there is no way the 300 people would be able to defeat all of those, all of those Midianites and Kedemites and whatever. There's no way. These are wild and crazy people, okay? No, but we're going to see, of course, that he does succeed with only 300. So in a way, I'm thinking this is actually a mirror situation of what we have seen until now. If until now, Gideon is constantly worried and asking for a sign to give him reassurance that God will indeed be with him. Now God is giving signs through the whittling down of the army to ensure that when the nation wins these wars, they realize God was with them. Okay, so these signs really have related purposes, and it's very, very important. And again, if we remember that the beginning of the story, even though initially it seemed that the ultimate goal was to defeat the oppressors, then we started with the Baal. We have to realize that one of the most important goals here in this whole story is not just to get rid of the oppressors, but to make sure the nation of Israel realize that it is God they must turn to, and it is God who is helping them. Okay, so and all of this fits in together, of course, the signs in both directions. Okay, and of course the destruction of the Baal, the altar of the Baal. Okay. Therefore, announce to them. I'm in verse 3. Therefore, announce to the men, let anybody who is timid and fearful turn back as a bird flies from Mount Gilead. Thereupon 22,000 of the troops turn back and 10,000 remain. Now, this very much reminds me of Deuteronomy 20. Okay, if you have that in front of you. In Deuteronomy 20, we have rules of warfare. There's a, this, of course, this is all part of Moses' speech to the nation before they enter the land of Israel. And as part of his instructions, he's telling them all these things that they need to do or know about before they go to war. And how does it start? When Deuteronomy 20, when you take the field against your enemies and see horses and chariots, forces larger than yours, have no fear of them. For the Lord your God, who brought you from the land of Egypt, is with you. Okay? Before you join the battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops. He shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, you are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Do not be in fear or in panic or in dread of them. For it is the Lord your God who marches with you to do battle for you against your enemy to bring your victory. And then we have a series of things. Then the officials come up and they start saying all these different people that are able to get out or to leave the battle and not join the battle. Somebody has recently built a house and hasn't yet had a chance to live in it. If somebody is recently married, all these different things. But what's the very, very end? Verse 8, the official shall go on addressing the troops and say, Is there anyone afraid and disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his. So what we see here is that in an army that's going to fight against incredible odds, who will have to be relying on God's help and have confidence in God's help, if someone is frightened, they're not going to be a good candidate for this war. Now, realize all along we have a Gideon who seems to be frightened and seems to be asking for signs. But here, he's suddenly not at all frightened. And what God is doing now is not just ensured that Gideon won't be frightened, but he's going to ensure that only the people who should be part of that battle are there. So in this first case, he got rid of those who are frightened. Goodbye. He doesn't want them. Okay. Then there are still too many troops, the Lord said to Gideon. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. Anyone of whom I tell you, this one is to go with you, that one shall go with you. And anyone of whom I tell you, this one is not to go with you, that one shall not go. So we took the troops down to the water. Now we have an incredibly strange test here. And it's really not, I'll show you, there's two different ways to understand the text. Let's read it carefully. Then the Lord said to Gideon, set apart all those who lap up the water with their tongues like dogs. Okay, I'm going to stop reading here because I'm going to now translate it the way it's actually written, and you will see how it can be interpreted in two different ways. Okay? And God said, Lord said to Gideon, everyone who licks the water with his tongue, the way a dog licks, should be placed alone, and all those who bend on their knees to drink. That's the literal translation. Now, those who lapped the water into their mouths by hand numbered 300. All the rest of the troops got down on their knees to drink. Now, if you go to the regular translation that you probably have, it makes it sound as if we have two groups initially, those who lick with their tongue and those who lick like a dog. Okay, no, excuse me, those who lick with their tongue like a dog, and those who bend down on their knees to drink. Okay, what is the difference between someone who licks like a dog and someone who bends down on their knees to drink? If you go down on your knees and you drink the water, you're going to put your tongue in the water, right? You're kneeling down, right? And then what do we see afterwards? Those who licked with their hands to their mouth are 300. Were those people who bent down, or were those people just who bent down without crouching on their knees, who just bent down, took their hand, looked up the water, and licked it with their tongue? So there's really two different ways of interpreting this, okay? One is that the people who bent down on their knees are not the same as the people who licked like dogs, and the people who lick like dogs are the ones who licked with their hands. I think it's more logical to say that those who licked like dogs are the ones who bent down on their knees, and the ones who licked with their hands did not bend on their knees, but they crouched. I mean, they bent down, they just to pick up the water. Okay. Anyway, so that's number one, two ways of seeing who's who. But another thing is, well, what does this mean? How can this test possibly filter out all these people, 9,700 people, leaving you with 300? What is the significance of this test? So there are a number of different interpretations. Okay. So Rashi is a very, classic one. He's saying that the difference there is between those who bow down and those who use their hands. Okay. Why? Because when you bow down, it is as if you're worshiping, when people would worship pagan gods, they would bow down, they would crouch down. And so we are trying to get rid of any kind of, bowing down that might be connected with pagan worship. Okay. Now we have similar kinds of interpretations where another one says when you're bowing down, it shows that you're over eager to drink. Okay. If you picture a brave soldier, he's going to be able to withstand the temptation to drink. He'll do it carefully or whatever, as opposed to, I need my drink, I need my drink. Maybe this person is going to be too eager to get his drink at the expense of his bravery. That's another way of looking at it. And another way of looking at it is those people who bent down, they may be a little lazier. They may be looking for more comfort. They don't have that same strength or bravery. And another way is just this idea of standing straight and being, not willing to bend down, whether to a pagan god or to anybody. Okay. You need to have someone who's going to stand straight. That's a sign of a truly brave and bold soldier. Even as it may, this is how the whole, you may look at it differently, you may have different interpretations, but there's no question that those who did not bend down, those who put their hands into their mouth, these are the ones who are chosen, because it says in verse 6, the rest of the troops got down on their knees to drink. So it's clear from verse 6 that the getting down on the knees or not getting down on the knees becomes the defining movement. Okay. And then then the Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you and I will put Midian into your hands. Through the 300 lappers or lickers, let the rest of the troops go home. So the lappers took the provisions and horns that the other men had with them, and he sent the rest of the men of Israel back to their homes, retaining only the 300 men. Okay. And this is, and of course, the end of that, the Midianite camp was below him in the plain. We will stop here. We're going to take up in our next class exactly what happens as they prepare for the battle and how this battle ended up being won, which in itself is an amazing story. Okay, anybody have questions? You can unmute yourself, make comments or questions, whatever.
I have a comment about the lapping of the water and whatnot. If you're all bent over like that, you can't be on guard to who's coming up behind you. If you bring some water up to your mouth, you can still
remain standing. That I like that.
No, you
That's
can still
wonderful.
look out for enemies approaching.
Right.
Yeah. To me, it's a matter of being on guard better. If you're
I
not
like
all
that.
bent,
Good,
that
great.
to me is just obvious. I mean, it's not spiritual. It's not spiritual, but I guess I'm a real fighter. I don't know. I keep an eye out for the enemy.
I agree.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
Anybody else have something to add or comment? Okay, so we will resume our study with chapter 7, verse 9, when we meet again in 2 weeks. And again, I apologize that we have so much interruption, but we will get through the book of Judges. It just may take us a while.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below, as well as on the notification bell. And that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.